Greetings and welcome to In the Trees, the cannabis, gardening, and lifestyle podcast highlighting methods, products, growers, and breeders from Maine, the East Coast, and beyond. I'm your host, Mr. Roots, and I'm stoked to deliver you the lowdown on all things cannabis, presented not just for the well-vetted OGs in the garden, but for those buying a seed pack to grow their very first garden. This show is especially for those buying their very first cannabis to try. If you are listening in your car, sit back, relax, and strap on your seatbelt. And if you are listening in the garden, turn us up so you can hear us over the fans. Sending out good vibes from the rock-bound coast of Maine. We are In the Trees. Welcome to episode 4 of In the Trees podcast. This episode, we are joined by none other than HighStrikerFarms, and I know you're going to love listening to this interview. But first, we have something special for you.
They say experience teacheth wisdom.
It's time for a Stoney story. This is the part of the show where you, the listener, gets to enjoy a story told to you by one of the Stoney guests here on the show. Stoney stories are recorded here in the Alight studio after a feature we call Spontaneous Combustion, where guests of the show get irie and give their thoughts on some cannabis, extract, or other product. The effects from those sessions are the catalyst for the stories you will be hearing. It was a blast to have my buddy Ryan from McDermott Shapes stop by the studio. Ryan is a professional surfboard shaper and an avid surfer. He is also a real nice guy to sit and talk with. Although he has had his fair share of experiences with cannabis over the years, Ryan is not someone you would call a heavy or regular user. Instead, he uses the herb in a very settling and healing way, mostly at the end of the day to wind down, or if he has an ache or pain to deal with. I find his approach to cannabis very respectful and refreshing. I love the story you're about to hear, and I think you will too. Out of the choices of flower from local growers that I offered, Ryan chose Grape Grow's Animal Kush Mints to try. Look for his review of this flower in a future episode of Spontaneous Combustion. For now, turn up the volume and listen closely, as this is his Stoney story. Enjoy.
Inch strand or inch reef in Dingle, Ireland. There's a point break there that's like a mile long.
Wow.
And it goes to a beach, and that's the inch strand. It's at the base of the Dingle Peninsula in Southern Ireland, and it's sweet. One of my best friends, her family had been going to Ireland, at least her mother had been going there for years, and she'd picked a place that she loved and wanted the family to all go, and they rented a beautiful house, lined this up for a year on the coast, Southern Ireland, Dingle Peninsula, private beach pretty much, like very small community with farms. They had livestock in the fields and beautiful Irish getaway. Three days before the trip, she gets sick, and it's her frigging appendix.
Oh no.
Appendix burst. Hospital, removed, fine, can't go on the trip. Aren't going to give them the money back for any, like, the tickets. And so they asked the girl and her friend and the other people that were going if they'd want anyone to go, and I was the only one that they said they wanted to bring.
Wow.
And so I was flexible and said, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
And it was only a couple $100 to exchange the ticket to me. 2 days before the trip, I didn't know I was going. They called and asked me if I could go, and I said yes, and I made it happen. And it happened to be for my birthday, and it happened to be for one of the biggest swells that they got that whole winter. The place that we were was an open, exposed, gnarly beach with a river, and then that inch strand and inch reef were maybe 20 minutes to the inland on this finger. And that point break went off. It was insane. I've never really seen anything like it. I think the buoy hit 18 feet at 16 seconds.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Long rides?
Minute and a half, you know.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Many people out there with you?
No, that first time it was me and one other guy. He was an older guy who claimed to be one of the first to be surfing there. He'd been there for like 40 years or something. The next day was my birthday. Went to this spot that the old timer said he'd meet me because I asked if there were more barreling waves. And we met there. He told me the spot to meet him that next evening, and I woke up wicked early and went there first thing. Get there, you pull down this like creek down to a rocky beach at a river mouth, and there's a headland looking out to the east. I can just see waves coming around the point a little bit, and then I see one wrap from the rocks come all the way into where I am, and I'm like, whoa. And it's like proper cobblestone reeling point break. There's one guy sleeping in his van and nobody else, and so I just park and I watch it for a bit, and I start freaking out, and I could not get in my suit fast enough. Book it out there, and I'm the only one out there for like 30 minutes just catching some of the most amazing waves of my life.
Wow.
And after, I don't even know, probably 15, 20 waves, I get one of the best waves I've ever got. I'm uncontrollably laughing because I just had one of, a crazy experience, and I look in and the guy who was sleeping in his van's pumping his fists in the air. He came out and surfed with me for another hour.
And it's your birthday.
Yeah.
Ah, that's great.
Stoney Stories are brought to you by Frass Valley. Frass Valley is an organic superworm-based garden amendment that I personally have used a bunch in my garden. It has a balanced NPK ratio and a lab-tested level of chitin at 16.9%. This means that it aids your plant in building its immune system, increasing beneficial microorganisms and mycorrhiza in your soil, while also discouraging soil-borne insects who might be looking to prey on your garden. If you are looking for an amendment that will help you grow strong plants, check them out at Frass Valley on Instagram or go to their website frassvalley.com to order some today. Listeners of the show receive 10% off their orders by using the code words "in the trees" at checkout. Wait till you see what Frass Valley's Superworm Frass can do for your garden.
That's the art of the hash making that some people are getting into every day as it's growing more and more. It's an art. You're going to get a lower yield, but you're going to get a more natural product.
Yeah. And you're tapping into a tradition that goes back thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
And
the sieving process.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The hashashines of old. If you listened to episode 3, then you've heard HighStrikerFarms' amazing Stoney story of open blasting gone horribly wrong. If you haven't listened to episode 3, I would highly recommend checking that one out. Quite a story. In this episode, we have a scorcher of an interview, as the man himself dropped by the Elite studio. That's right, Ryan of HighStriker Farm. Ryan did not come to the interview empty-handed either. Not only did he make the trek, he brought some killer hash and flour with him and laced the In the Trees production team right up. I'm talking samples of nice flour tops with a matching gram of hash for each one. His granimals, grapes and cream, and, oh man, the absolutely amazing cherry strudel hash that won the Secret Cup. Unbelievable hash and beautiful flour. This interview is really compelling because although he has lived here on the east side for 12 years, he got his start growing in the high desert canyonlands surrounding Flagstaff, Arizona. I spent a fair amount of time in Flagstaff and in Arizona in general. It's a rough and tumble country, with growing conditions and environmental issues that many of us in the rest of the country would be scratching our heads over. For instance, Ryan talks about how not only did he have no idea what fungal pathogens looked like because of Arizona's dry climate, he also needed to cage his plants in soil pockets on steep canyon walls to guard against armies of pack rats, girdling his stalks and killing his plants. Come on. This is part 1 of HighStrikerFarms' interview, but don't worry, we won't make you wait long for the second installment. But it is worth waiting for. For now, roll up a joint, put that torch to your banger, or pack a bowl. Then take a sip of some fresh, cool water, because HighStriker Farm and In the Trees are bringing the fire. So you grew up in Cali, you did a lot of surfing there?
Yep, grew up out there all the way up till college, and also had a strong connection. I was born in Colorado, so had always a condominium that my family owned, or my grandparents owned in Steamboat Springs. Okay. So I went to Steamboat back in the day when it was a small mountain and you had to hike to get to any of these back bowls that now all have lifts and stuff to them.
You've been earning your turns for a while then, huh?
Yeah, I earned some turns back in the day, and I even mountain bike those mountains the days before bikes had suspension. We were taking bikes up gondolas and riding them down on no suspension bikes, and you get 10 runs in, and the next day you could barely move your wrists and your forearms because every muscle in your arms from shaking the whole way down the mountain were just all atrophied and sore, But that was like early era mountain biking, stump jumpers, the old rock hoppers, those old mountain bikes were like super badass back then. So yeah. I
still ride Specialized?
No, I don't,
okay.
But I still have a handful of bicycles. I still like getting out and pedaling bikes around. I like the old Schwinn Cruisers now. I have some old 50s, 1950, two 52s. And another like one that's 68.
You got a rack for a board on any of those?
I have a rack for the dirt bike.
Oh no!
So I can put the dirt bike surfboard on the side of the dirt bike. And,
oh wow, that's cool.
I can run that. It's an enduro, a little 250cc. So it's like it's super lightweight, small. It's like a mountain bike with a lawnmower engine in it.
I wish I had a picture of that, man. That's Maine right there, dude. Dirt bike with a surfboard holder.
With a surfboard holder on the side,
That's awesome.
Go get out to the rough spots.
Ah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So you grew up in, when you went to Cali, it was Newport Beach, right?
Yeah, my parents still live in the Orange County area. And then I did almost 10 years in Flagstaff, Arizona. And then made the journey out here about maybe 12, 13 years ago.
Yeah. Did you have a connection to Maine prior? Or?
Not directly to Maine, but my whole father's side of the family grew up as farmers in the Berkshire Mountains in western Massachusetts. Conway is the town that's out there that my family grew up in. They grew everything from tobacco, farming cattle, to all different types of stuff. And the tobacco barns still sit on my family's land out there. And I had the opportunity maybe to grow hemp there this year, but it's such a big job to take on a whole nother feat to drive out there and to maintain plants in an area and do that. But it would be a passion. It would be pretty cool to see families' land again used for cannabis, even if it's hemp production,
It may have been at one point. People made a lot of things out of hemp back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I have roots to this northeast area. So it just was a matter of time, after living in Portsmouth and making the bump up to Maine, that now I feel like I'm in a good homey spot.
Yeah. Well, you can still approach the Western Mountains fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And still have Maine, you know.
And then
you can,
still have the awesome ocean. And,
yeah.
You know, and the cold doesn't bother me. I surf all winter long.
Yeah. Well,
Even in the
Flagstaff's not a
coldest
warm
days.
town
No.
in the winter.
No, so it was a good adjustment from California to move over.
Growing on canyon walls.
You want to hear a little bit of that?
I wrote that down because I was like, that sounds cool.
Yeah,
so you grew some herb on some canyon walls?
Yeah, and Flagstaff, you know, it's very steep terrain. So that Kelly Canyon had, I had 3 grow spots on it, and they were basically very small style grows, fit maybe 10 or 12 plants at most in each spot. And you would have to rappel down onto a shelf. You'd walk across that shelf, get you down to another shelf, and then those lower shelves would get you away from the deer and the elk and the animals that you would think would eat your plants. And I would grow plants out on these spots, but it only took me 1 season to realize that pack rats were the ultimate enemy. Pack rats are a large rat that live in Arizona, and they scatter everything in front of the den, and they're large rat, and they would actually go and chew around the base of the early vegetative plants, around the base of the stem, girdle it, let it tip over, then they'd come back once it was dry and bite through the blast part, and they drag the whole plant into their dens and use them as bedding. So I literally was tracing the leaves, because the leaves would pop off as they're dragging them and moving them into these dens. And I'd be like, what? I just took the time to sprout these in my backyard under a little mini greenhouse, and then I'd put them in solo cups with a clear plastic over them and put them in the backpack and ride the dirt bike out and go drop them in. Yeah. So it took me 1 year of trial and error of dealing with the rats that I figured out how to deal with them. And that was building a cage to grow your vegetative plants in. So I took metal square link wire and built a square frame.
Hardware cloth.
A hardware cloth. Built a square frame and made a lid out of hardware cloth. And I put all the plants in that. Once the plants grew up to the point where they were like pushing on the hardware cloth, then I would pop the lid of the hardware cloth, leave all the sidewalls up, and kind of roll them out a little bit to prevent the rats from getting at the base. Man.
Yeah.
And
Did you improvise that, or was that some old
all
school?
Out of my own mind.
Nice.
My own mind, totally. Yeah. And I completely set it up to where after they started to bust out of that, that's when they were rocketing, because they'd already set their feet well. Yeah. They had been through that young stage. Everything had hardened up. And so I was starting to become successful. But then there'd occasionally be the little scraggler rat that wanted to still come over and chew a plant and mess something up. So I decided, well, I'll go to the Agway store and get some poison to try and take care of a couple of these rats out on just this one hillside right here. There's probably millions of them everywhere. It's not a big deal. So I got this stuff called Just One Bite from the Agway store. It's like a bar, and when they take a bite of it, that's all they need, I guess, you know? So I bought a little bag of these bars, and I put them all out around the plants, thinking that if they're going to come, hopefully they'll eat these and they won't go for them. Yeah. Well, the rats were definitely eating them. And after a little bit, I started finding a few rat carcasses. And I was like, oh, this is like, I could smell a dead animal. I was like, this is lame. I can't believe, like, I figured they'd die in somewhere else. So I took the effort of going and shoveling a little hole, putting some of the dead carcasses in it, because I felt pretty bad about it. And then the smell of all the dead carcasses, believe it or not, is what called a mountain lion to the area. Because these canyonous, sloped, tiered areas had perfect sand on these shelves. And I'd be climbing up out of the spot one day and look down and go, wow, that's a really large paw print right there.
Yeah.
I think that could be a mountain lion.
So while that would be beneficial for taking care of pack rats, that could also be really...
calling a mountain lion in, because now you're making dead fresh food for them. Right. And if they're hungry, they might follow their nose to that scent of dead meat.
And find you.
There.
Checking on your plants. Oh, dude.
So I ended up making up my own thing, which was I called knocking rocks. So when I'd go out and climb into my spot, I'd take 2 big rocks and I'd clack 2 rocks together. Yeah. bang, 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 hit them as hard as I could. And that was my deterrent. But I'm telling you, after I saw those paw prints out there at that spot, every time I went out there, I felt like there was something watching me. Never ever saw a mountain lion. Never saw anything other than a couple footprints. It could have been an animal passing through that smelt it and went to another area back to his own territory. But I still look back at that. I'm like, wow, that's how dangerous some people are willing to risk to go grow some plants out on a cliffside, you know? And I had to haul all my water too, because it was Arizona until monsoon season hit and towards the tail end of the summer. The whole beginning half of the summer, Arizona was dry, those high elevations. So it was like Afghanistan. So I would ride with 5-gallon Sparklets bottle and a 3-gallon Sparklets bottle in a 64,000 cubic inch camping backpack on a dirt bike all the way out there, rappel in with it, water everything. And if I had to, I'd go climb down into the bottom of the canyon to soak up water out of these quaggy pits to try and get extra water, because some days it was, you could just tell they were hurting and they wanted water and you just didn't have enough. So
and then the heat's bouncing off the rock.
And everywhere. They would cook them for sure.
Did you find any genetics that did better in that hot, dry environment that you'd want to share with anybody from Arizona who could be listening? I
could tell you a lot of the genetics that I grew out there were I had for a long time. I did have an Afghani that was very short and stout and very nice in how it budded. But I also grew the great white shark out there.
Oh, yeah.
That was an old school strain.
Yeah.
And
surprisingly fairly high in CBD.
Yep. I also grew one called Maple Leaf that was from Sensi Seed Bank.
Yeah, that's a famous strain.
Famous old school one. So I also had that one out there. And I also did Shiva Shante.
Oh, nice.
Which was another real old school.
I haven't heard that name in a long time.
So those are some of the strains that pop into my head from the ones that I was running when I was growing out in those spots. And dude, I would have to say I never dealt with pests because it was so dry and arid. I never saw a mold or a mildew, and it was an ideal outdoor growing climate. And come towards the end, you'd get a half-hour thunder shower every day. So it was kind of like the end of my summer. I would get to go out and do stuff. I didn't feel like I had to babysit these canyon slopeside plants.
Right.
Monsoon season was here. Woohoo! I'll go hike a canyon. I'll go hang out. I don't feel as tied down.
And then go harvest in like a month or something.
And then go right out there in October, and right at the beginning of October and be chopping stuff down. And I never had big harvests, 2-3 pounds each spot maybe at most. I wasn't banging big plants because the root bed wasn't very big either. They're on a rock slope.
Anything you got. Urban Phoenix was at that time probably going for 350, 400 or more an ounce.
Easily for decent weed. And it was back then, even commercial Mexi weed was still very common. And it changed it. The beasters changed everything too as they came in,
Yeah, beasters were an interesting thing. All that Mexi was always pretty much there. Yeah. You could score like an eighth or a quarter, whatever you needed from it. And then beasters dropped. I was stoked when they dropped. I was, getting them up here and whatnot. And
you could make more off of them than you could anything on the dirt weed,
Right. Then here in Maine, the Maine green bud would drop every fall.
Yeah.
And that would be awesome until it dried up. And it usually didn't stick around too long because you had a lot of other states south of us that were
consumers.
Yeah.
Still back then.
Yeah, because, Boston and New York would love to see Maine outdoor.
Yeah.
And they had their own outdoor, of course, but they have a bigger population density that's
tougher to find rural areas to do it.
Yeah. Beasters cut into the industry a little bit, but I think they added to it back then, and they must have added to the gene pool. People finding seeds, or Melton Pot even said that he found seeds in that and he was popping those and working them back in the day.
Yeah, we only had, when I was in Arizona, beasters, and then we had kind bud, but then we'd get that fall harvest that came out of Humboldt, and there was a couple kids that I knew that had brothers that grew out in Humboldt, so we'd always occasionally get that invite to go out there when we were in college to go trim, and that was always a grand old time. We'd go out there and trim, make a bunch of money, and then back then, they were doing these tumblers for a keef. So we'd come back with like QPs and half pounds of keef. And I remember we'd smoke on that for like the whole winter into the winter, you know? Like we'd be getting dirt weed and then you'd put a little dirt weed in so your joint would burn and a shit ton of that keef and you'd smoke these like keef dirt weed joints, you know?
Sweeten it up a little bit.
Yep, sweeten it up, make it a little more potent.
Hey, oh man, that's funny. Yeah, Humboldt's herb would eventually reach Maine. I'm sure it was more common in Arizona. But when people would go out and trim and then get paid in herb versus taking the money, sometimes they'd bring back a few pounds and got to see like some old Granddaddy Purple, some train wreck. This was like probably 2003, 2004 was seeing some of those older strains. Well, older now. They were beautiful then.
I remember 2003 going to Reggae on the River.
Oh, sick.
Out there, getting Romulan and Trainwreck, a couple of those strains, and being from Arizona, it wasn't that heady. And so it was like...
Wasn't the head stash.
It wasn't the head stash quality, you know? Right. And so going to that Reggae on the River that year in 2003 was a mind blower because Bob Marley Ave just goes right down into the venue. Coming out from Arizona, everyone's just selling whatever you want, walking into the venue, and yet we're camping across the street, so we don't have to do anything other than walk somewhere back across to the campground. Yeah. And it was just like, I remember being like a kid in like the candy store back then because it was uber quality, super good, and you could talk directly with the growers that were there, had grown it, and it was like such a cool organic feeling. And then you go see, killer reggae artists just jamming the whole night through, and those days I look back, I'm like, wow, those were unique.
Formative times.
Yeah. But I remember doing those events and that was like, oh, those were wild times.
Humboldt always had a great quality of traditional hash that I can remember. People were always making bubble hash out there and hanging on to bubble balls and things of that nature. I've always liked that nice soft, bubble hash that I was seeing out there, and it's like almost like the smell of Humboldt. I mean, I can associate it with like bubble hash.
Totally.
Yeah.
I would agree. I'd say that BHO, when we started blasting that and no one knew how to smoke it, it was one of those things that what we decided to do was let's take the hash oil and take the keef, because we had bubble hash keef and quality keef, and blend the two together. And if you worked them like flour and oil and you just sat there and kneaded it like clay almost, you could end up with these gnarly big balls of what we called soft hash because it never got hard. You could put it in a jar and put it away, and it was always soft and super, super soft and pliable because it was a blend of keef and BHO, blast.
That's awesome.
And we used to go sell those at the dead shows. I had one buddy that would do it with me. We usually make up like a muffin-sized giant ball of it, and then we'd sit there and gram it all out, and then we'd go to the shows and we'd sell them as soft hash. And
in tinfoil?
Tinfoil balls. Yep. And
I used to do that as well, man.
And it
not
was
with the BHO, but with like a keef hash.
With keef hash, yeah. It was just the common way to sell it, I feel like, back in the day.
Yeah.
And
so these are the dead shows in Oakland and the city, or?
And some of them that we would hit were the ones that were going through. I would travel all the way over to Fort Collins, Colorado, hit some of them there because we were in Flagstaff. We would also go down and hit some of the ones that are out in LA because that was like a 5-7 hour drive. Albuquerque was a good one. Out on the res. We go to the Indian Navajo res and go to those shows. People would gobble them up on the res always. Seriously.
Yeah. So how'd you start making hash, man?
After taking Frenchie's class, that really spurred me to want to get back into making hash. And at that point, I had been taking all my trim and having this person process it or that person. And, getting BHO product back wasn't bad, but it wasn't something that I felt excited about. And so I took the class and was like, man, all right, here's the chance. Now I can start washing trim again, learning it better, figuring it out a little bit more. And then a lot of help came through Mega too. My buddy at Nor'easter, he was the one helping too. He had a space in his basement that he said, hey, I got this extra space. We could just do it all down here, So I said, all right, let's put all the equipment that I have down there, and we'll kind of tag team washing and squishing together. Two minds melt together better than one, And so having a buddy to help too, who was very passionate about it, made the hash quality come out even better. And it was one of those things that seeing excitement come back out of taking something and making something that I liked out of it was back to square one again. It's like, oh, this is neat. This is exciting.
Yeah.
And then we'd have some stuff that would be very disappointing. We'd wash and go, wow, we barely got anything off of that. All right, well, we'll know not to wash that. So it took a little record keeping too to know that we were progressing. And in the very beginning, we weren't taking any records. We were just washing shit and seeing what we could get. And that was good. But I think once we started keeping record, then it was like, oh, okay, we are getting better. Or, wow, this strain sucks and that one works awesome. Okay, let's only use that one. Trying to
suss it all out.
Yeah, trying to figure out the pathway.
Yeah. Are you washing fresh frozen material most of the time?
Yeah, a lot of fresh frozen.
Yeah.
In the last few harvests, it's been almost half the harvest has been fresh frozen, and then the rest would be for flour. And then I also end up with all the trim from that flour being trimmed that I end up processing too. So it would always be a considerable amount of rosin from it.
You've had a pretty cool relationship with Colorado Genetics.
Yeah. We were actually college buddies back in the day in the Arizona area. He graduated a little bit earlier than me and went back to Colorado. And when he was moving back to Colorado, as we all knew, Colorado was a little bit more progressive in the cannabis industry. So he saw it fit to start a seed company years ago. And he always shared genetics with me back then. And I think it was probably about 3 years ago when he came to me and was like, hey, I wanted a rep on the East Coast. And that's when I was like, dude, I'm your man. I'd love it. So it grew and our relationship also grew. And I got the fun of learning breeding with him and got the fun of, also working his seeds. And at the same time, he exploded with his business because he had, already moved seeds into people like the Jungle Boys' hands, and they had a growing influence in the industry. And so all of a sudden people were looking to where they got their genetics. And when it came to this guy out of Colorado under Colorado Genetics, it was like all of a sudden this momentum got behind him, and it was like his little passion of always wanting to have that in him, breeding, launched and kind of sent him to that next realm. And still talk to you like Colorado, he is that mind. He has all those strains mapped in his head. He knows how he's working things, and certain people have that genetic knack. And it was really neat to be able to work them through all of it. In the recent future, he has moved more towards a lot of his online sales and stuff like that. So I'm not moving as many seeds for him, but still have access to get genetics when necessary. So if there is people that are really hungry for certain ones, I can sometimes reach out and say, hey, bro packs, can I get a few?
That's awesome. So, yeah, I actually remember that one of those IPK events, I got some seeds from you. And I think I got a Legend OG.
Yeah, Legend crosses.
Yeah, and then I got a Hyper Sally cookies crossed with that was a cross that was a freebie. Yeah, that stuff was fire.
That one was amazing. Man. A lot of other people grew that out, and I remember even one of my buddies, Nor'easter, that does some growing. He grew those as one of his first grows ever, and he was like, bought a tent, set it up, threw those in as freebie seeds, and he was so stoked with what he got out at the end.
I was too. It was great stuff. Yeah.
So it's been a lot of fun working through his genetics. And so a lot of the work that I do skews towards Colorado's. The strains that I'm growing skew towards a lot of his work. But I love likes trying some of Oni's stuff now and, reaching out and getting all the other genetics going too. And now I've got another little pack here from you of some goodies to try.
Sweet,
so
that's how seeds spread.
Yeah.
It's fun,
Yeah.
Did Mega Raw get the Pido from you?
Yes, I think he got those out of a seed pack. They're definitely Colorado genetics.
Yeah.
That he bought from me.
Because I remember I was reminiscing, and I think at that IPK event you had Pido, because you had some of those crosses, and
I did.
I'm kind of kicking myself for not scooping up a pack of that back then.
And you want to know what's funny is he also knows Canorado, and he was kind of my in to going to the IPK. I didn't know Chris and all the other guys as well, but Mega had already been following Canorado heavily and already knew a lot of his genetics and been checking him out. And so when Canorado hooked me up, he's like, hey, I know this guy in Maine that you should go see to do these events. I was like, well, yeah, that would be awesome. And that was where it kind of sparked my relationship with Mega, who I still feel is one of our best hash makers out there and one of the earliest pioneers. He taught Frosty the Nugman, who's out in California, and Frosty washes majority of the, big heavy people's equipment out there. And so he's that early era. And I remember buying back then, Mega's solventless products at those IPKs. And I could only buy them for my own head stash because none of the people I sold stuff to or even close friends could enjoy that caliber of quality because it was so unique at the time. It was that much better than everything else. Big hands to Mega for back then, because he was pioneering that,
For sure, yeah. In the Trees has a lot of love for you, Mega Raw Melts. You've put Maine on the map in a really positive way and done quality hash making here.
Yep.
And so shout out to you, man.
Shout out for sure. Killer dude.
Yeah. What a great discussion and fun times recording this episode. Check out In the Trees podcast on YouTube to see a Memorial Day session that Ryan and I had together. You're going to want to see these photos. We were each smoking pre-rolls of his grapes and cream flour that had been rolled in grapes and cream rosin, then dusted with beautiful purple Tropicana cookies keef. Woo! The whole crew was lit like Elon Musk's flamethrower off that session. Quick reminder to our Patreon members. When you donate to In the Trees podcast, you'll have access to secret content and beautiful photos of the studio session, flour, and hash rosin that HighStriker Farm brought with him, as well as a ton more sweet content, including early access to part 2 of HighStriker Farm's interview. In the Trees Cannabis Podcast would like to thank the Maine Cannabis Chronicle for sponsoring the show. If you haven't had the opportunity to check out their magazine, you should ask your local caregiver store, dispensary, or grow store if they have a copy of it. If they don't, request that they carry it. The Maine Cannabis Chronicle is a great source of knowledge on all things related to the high-quality herb here in Maine. This is a beautifully edited, full-color, well-done magazine full of captivating articles from some of the best in the business today. Grab a copy and give it a read. I want to thank today's guests and contributors, Ryan at HighStriker Farm and Ryan at McDermott Shapes. I want to show some respect to Grape Grows for putting out that really nice Animal Cushman's flower and for just being an all-around good guy. Big ups, Grape. Sign up for our email newsletter at inthetreespodcast.com to stay in the loop about new content. And while you're on our website, check out our blog and read our informative posts. And visit the In the Trees shop for stickers, books, t-shirts, and other offerings by us and guests of the show. In the Trees podcast is proudly sponsored by the Maine Craft Cannabis Association. The MCCA is a diverse group of businesses and activists committed to supporting an authentic craft cannabis industry in Maine. Their motto, People, Place, and Plant, represents their focus on fighting for craft Maine-grown businesses through their legislative work in Augusta. The MCCA's social activism supports all Mainers' legal protected access to the plant. Check them out on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Maine Craft Cannabis Association, and please show your support to this extremely valuable organization. Please visit our website, inthetreespodcast.com, for bonus audio and video content, including more Stoney stories, our well-loved blog, and behind-the-scenes features unaired on the show. We want to say thank you to everyone who has helped spread the word about In the Trees podcast, as well as the amazing guests that we have on the show. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, or download us on Spotify. We want to deliver you more great audio and video content, and your support is greatly appreciated. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, or download us on Spotify. We want to deliver you more great audio and video content, and your support is greatly appreciated. If you would like to become a patron for In the Trees to show even more love and support, you can click the Donate tab on our website, which is linked to PayPal and Venmo, or you can look us up on Patreon under In the Trees Podcast and feel free to donate to the show. In the Trees Podcast is a labor of love, and our team is committed to providing you a quality show. We are so grateful for your show donations and Patreon support. They allow us to continue providing fun and educational podcast episodes like the one you just listened to, and maybe get some better mics and equipment for the studio. Apart from having access to a ton of behind-the-scenes audio and video, including raw cuts of myself and guests talking about things your kids might need earmuffs for, Patreon supporters also get the opportunity to score a pack of cannabis seeds from intentional crosses that I made in one of my own gardens, which are for tossing in your smoothie or feeding to your cockatiel.